Hello, friends and fans of the podcast. Wow, my head is spinning, and it is spinning very fast, like a swiftly spinning thing. You know, I need to start this episode, first of all, by thanking the man who gave me this idea. And I love it. I love it because it's a part of music that people sometimes don't pay attention to. And friend of the podcast, Fabio, sent me a message because I did ask on Instagram, hey, people, give me some ideas for new episodes. And I actually got a few responses. But I read Fabio's response and he's like, well, what about movie scores? And it hit me in the face like a ton of bricks. So thank you, Fabio, for this excellent idea. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the new fans that we have of the podcast in Norway, Canada, Spain, and Germany. I've noticed regular listeners in these countries, especially in British Columbia, Canada, and in Germany. We have a good amount of new listeners in those areas. So thank you so much for the support, and we welcome you to the show. And we look forward to someday maybe even getting some feedback from you. If you follow us on B Sharp and C, I try to engage quite often with the listeners. So thanks again. Now, we're going to have some serious fun in this episode. I got a lot of feedback from a lot of the fans of the podcast. And today's episode is, simply put, we need to B Sharp and C that movie music is groovy music. Have you ever been watching a scene in a movie and then like all of a sudden you're not even paying attention to the movie anymore because the music that you're listening to like gives you chills? It's absolutely amazing. Or maybe the opposite happens. Maybe you're actually not paying that much attention to a movie, and then all of a sudden this music just kind of pulls you in, and now you're paying more attention to the movie because of the gripping qualities of the music. I remember the first time something like this happened to me. Honestly, this is the first time that I looked at movies as a source of good music. It was 1988. My mother and I were watching the movie Rain Man. And there was this scene, Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman are just driving across a bridge in a car, and all of a sudden it comes on, this song, and it immediately gave me chills. It sounded almost like Peruvian, but with traces of electronica, some crazy, non-kit percussion, some guitar plucking with some weird surreal synthesized sounds. There was so much emotion stirring up inside of me because of this song. I didn't even really want to watch the movie anymore. I'm like, yeah, I don't care about Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman. Can we just hit rewind? I want to see that, that bridge scene again and listen to that song. And I want you to do me a favor. You can pause the podcast and do it now, because if you're listening on your phone, it's just a couple of clicks away. Or if you want to do it later, whatever, go to YouTube and type in Rain Man soundtrack. And the name of the song is Leaving Walbrook. It's got a slash in it. Leaving Walbrook / on the road. This song is just simply one of the best songs I've ever heard, period. Forget that it's a simple track and a film score. It's just awesome. Go ahead and listen to it, and then let me know. Let me know what you think of the song if it's not absolutely amazing. Now, here's a little bit of movie trivia for you. Who did the film score for Rain Man? Who did the film score for Rain Man? Well, it's none other than German-born Hans Zimmer. Earlier in his career. And I find it interesting, though, on IMDb, they don't even give him credit for the film score for Rain Man. It's not even mentioned, even though he was nominated in 1989 for an Oscar, and he lost to the Milagro Beanfield War. But he was nominated for an Oscar for Best Movie Score for the movie Rain Man. But now let's just talk a little bit about Hans Zimmer. Now, I could easily do like a full and complete episode about any one of the artists that we're going to mention in today's episode, or I should say movie composers or film composers, right? But I need to make this somewhat superficial because there's just so much to say. Now, Hans Zimmer is awesome. The guy is amazing. So aside from Rain Man, how about The Gladiator? That is friend of the podcast, Fabio's favorite film score, Interstellar. My favorite film score, Inception, Dunkirk. Well, let's just say many of Christopher Nolan's movies. Pirates of the Caribbean, The Last Samurai. Friend of the podcast, Sammy, got back to me and said, that is my favorite film score. I love that film score. But why do we need to do this? Why should we be sharp and see that movie music is groovy music, that it's worth listening to? Well, for some reason, I'm not saying all people do this, so if you're not in this category, don't be offended. But for some reason, people discard film scores as like a cheaper version of music, or music that isn't really complete because it was only made for the movie. The inspiration isn't really personal or identifiable. And I actually understand that thinking. I understand what someone means when they say that. However, many of you have probably noticed at the beginning of each episode now, I put like a little minute-long, musical riff, and there's music playing now in the background of my podcasts. That's music that I compose. I compose each little bit for each podcast, and I do that to add, to make the podcast more exciting, to add some depth to it. It's a podcast about music, so why not compose a little something and throw it on? Because if I use something from somebody else, I'll get sued. So I'm just writing my own stuff. Now, what's to say that I can't take one of those little riffs and make a song out of it? Something personal, something that maybe you can identify with. What's to say that those riffs or that little 1-minute bit of music isn't something that I've already written and put into a song, but now I'm using it for the podcast? So music is expression. Really, no matter what, no matter how we view it, no matter what the medium is, music is expression. Forget the medium, forget the venue, forget the circumstance. Music has the ability to reach your heart and your soul, and it doesn't matter where you hear it, why it was written, or who's paying for its rights. Something else to keep in mind is that if we begin to open our mind to movie music, it changes not only how we view movies, it changes our whole approach to entertainment, because we can actually begin to see the film composer's personality and style coming out in the songs, even throughout different movies. You can be watching a comedy in one day and then watch an action movie 2 weeks later from the same movie composer, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I noticed this style. This is so-and-so. I'll give you a perfect example because it might be hard for you to imagine what I'm talking about. You can actually go online and look this up. Alan Silvestri, one of the greatest film composers out there, truly talented. He's done movies like The Abyss, Predator, Back to the Future. Dun, 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 dun. Remember that? Alan Silvestri. Ready Player One, Castaway, Romancing the Stone, and many others. But one day I'm sitting down and I'm watching Back to the Future with my wife. We're sitting there, we're checking it out, and it's the scene where Marty McFly is in the movie theater. I'm sorry, not in the movie theater. Listen to me. Marty McFly is in the... Where the heck was he? Oh, the parking lot. Parking lot, movie theater, same thing. So Marty McFly was in the parking lot, right? And it was just before the Libyans came to shoot at Doc. And there was this music playing in the background, and I noticed its style. Okay, it was by Alan Silvestri, and as I'm listening to the song, I'm like, wow, soft strings playing in the background, but then like horns come in, but they're like the stabbing horns. They're not necessarily smooth and drawn out with a lot of vibrato. It's like stabbing sound. And next thing you know, I'm with Arnold Schwarzenegger in the forest with mud on his face, trying to kill the Predator. Alan Silvestri did the film score for Predator also with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the style, even the key that the song was written in, and some of the licks were almost the same. And then, of course, Ready Player One, same thing. The music is very similar to Predator. Now, what does that say? Does it say that Alan Silvestri is lazy? Honestly, I don't know the man, so I can't say that. But the thing that I gather from this is that if he weren't a movie composer and just was out there making music on his own, I would kind of know what his style would be like or what type of melody he likes. Because you have 3 different movies, an action movie, a comedy, and I think Ready Player One, I haven't seen it. I actually think it's science fiction. So you have like 3 different styles of movies and all similar music. But if you listen to Pink Floyd, you can find 5 or 6 songs that sound alike, or Aerosmith. So a person's personality comes out in the way that they compose their music. That personal feel to music isn't lost just because it's a film score and that they have to write the music for a certain type of movie. What about Academy Award-winning Bill Conti? I love this guy, first of all. I mean, he did a film score that pretty much every person that ever started lifting weights or exercising since the movie Rocky has been listening to. And he's easy to overlook because he hasn't done anything recent lately. But the Rocky theme? I mean, he could have retired after that. It's like, I saw this comedy bit once, and this guy was saying, I wish I was one of the men that walked on the moon. Because men, when they're sitting around drinking beer and they're talking, they have this tendency to brag about themselves. Well, I did this, and I did that, and I did this, and last week the boss gave me a raise, and I'm getting a promotion, and I rebuilt my whole entire house, and this comedian was saying, sorry, that I wish I was one of the guys that walked on the moon, because I would let everyone finish their stories. I would let all the men finish bragging about themselves, and then when they were done, I would just put down my drink, wipe my mouth with my napkin, and just say, I walked on the moon. And that's it. It's the best. You don't even need to say any more. No one's going to beat that story. Bill Conti could have retired after he wrote the theme for Rocky. He could have done nothing. And then 20 years later, when everyone's bragging about what they've done, he could have been like, I wrote the Rocky theme. Silence. But he didn't retire after that. He did, The Karate Kid, Bad Boys, Masters of the Universe, and many others. Movie music is groovy music. It's real music. In fact, to some extent, it's kind of harder because you have to take into consideration that the only reason why you're being paid this money is to bring out emotion in people, and it usually has to be something that the music director of the movie agrees with, or the director of the movie, or depending on the circumstance. Movies will have like a music director, but the director of a movie also could say, hey, I want the volume of the music to be a little higher. I want this, I want that. I want the conversation to be hard to hear, which drives me nuts. Christopher Nolan does that. I love the guy to death, but because of decades of listening to loud music, I already have hearing issues. And then when I'm watching a movie and the background music ramps up and I can't hear the dialogue, I think I'm going crazy. But anyways, movie music is still music. It's worth listening to in many different areas too. Sometimes I put on movie music to work. I work for a software company. I'm a computer engineer, and sometimes when I'm trying to analyze a problem and I just need to concentrate, I'll put the Interstellar soundtrack in the background and just focus and then work. And sometimes when the music really gets me feeling emotional, I might change it because then I stop paying attention and now I'm just listening to the music. But I think that happens with everyone. But before I mention any more artists, let's just discuss, why am I doing this episode in the first place? Because now this type of music, movie music, is ridiculously easy to access. You don't have to go searching for it. You don't have to go buy the soundtrack at the music store. You can just go to Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, or the other 88,000 streaming services that exist. You can stay on your couch the whole time eating Cheetos while you do it. And just by a simple click of your cheese-stained fingers, bam, you're listening to a soundtrack. And this is music by artists and musicians. It's not just background music. There's a lot of feeling to this. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention good old JW. That's right, John Williams. Now, he's not one of my favorites, but he's up there. And he's probably the most famous film composer. I would have to say he's the most famous. And, I went to Google and I typed in list of John Williams movies, and my computer nearly crashed. It came back with a trillion names, like Jaws, Star Wars, Jurassic Park, the Indiana Jones franchise, E.T., Superman, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Saving Private Ryan, and 1,000 others. Okay, this guy has kept busy. And when I asked on Instagram the simple question, hey, I'm going to do an episode about movie scores, about film scores. Please tell me, what's your favorite film score? Friend of the podcast, Jessica, replies right away, Star Wars. And she has a point. I mean, I think Star Wars is probably in the top 5 as far as most recognizable movie music. And then friend of the podcast, Adam, says Saving Private Ryan. And I'm not going to lie, that made me scratch my head. I began to think, I can't think of one note from that movie. So I went to YouTube, I put in Saving Private Ryan soundtrack. It is by John Williams. And I'm listening to it, and I was blown away by how great the horn arrangements were. And then it hit me. Adam and I have something in common. You see, we both play the trumpet, and just so you know, he's a heck of a lot better than I am. But this soundtrack has perfectly recorded horns in it. It's just, you can play trumpet and play well, but you can also play and just invoke a lot of emotion, and this film score does that. And many think of John Williams as just a composer. But every composer has their instruments that they fall to. And John Williams played piano and trombone. So he knew how much a good horn arrangement can help invoke a lot of emotion. And that's what you get with the film score for Saving Private Ryan. Something else also to expound on this point. So my friend Brett, he's actually a friend of the podcast, and he's been a guest of the show. He contacted me and he said, you know what, Artie? Empire Strikes Back is the best film score. And of course, me not being I like Star Wars, don't get me wrong, but I can't break it down into parts. But he made a very interesting point. He said the last half hour of Empire Strikes Back is amazing, but also the Yoda theme. When Yoda was lifting the X-Wing out of the swamp, he said that gave him chills. And then, of course, the theme of the music just before the ending credits, he said, is also something new, something different, and it's just really worth listening to. And it dawned on me, John Williams does something with Star Wars that I haven't noticed in other movies. And, just because I have this podcast doesn't mean that I know everything about every topic that I talk about. So feel free to correct me. Feel free to add to the conversation any way you want. You can follow us on Instagram or Facebook under B#C. Brett said, he made mention of the Yoda theme. And it's like, oh my goodness, that's right. John Williams did something with Star Wars that I just think is amazing. And maybe this is one of the reasons why it's one of, if not the most famous movie score. John Williams changed, even though it stayed the same, the idea, the feel was the same for each character in Star Wars, whether all of a sudden now you're talking about the dark side and they're showing the Death Star, or they're showing Luke Skywalker and they're talking about the Force, or they're talking about Jedi. For each group of people, like Jedis and the dark side, or for certain characters, the notes that were played changed a little bit, unique to that character. I don't remember seeing, maybe now that I think about it, maybe Ellen Silvestri did it in Predator. When they showed Arnold Schwarzenegger getting ready, and then they showed the Predator getting ready, I think the music was different. So the Predator had his music, and Arnold Schwarzenegger had his type of thing. I actually am now going to have to research that, but it's something that is very evident in Star Wars, that certain characters have certain themes that go with them, even though it never leaves the realm of Star Wars theme music. It's really ingenious and incredibly hard to do, by the way. Keeping the music the same but different enough so you can relate it to one character is something, well, it's one of the reasons why John Williams is worth more than the moon. But I mean, it's something to pay attention to when you're listening to movie music, that sometimes the music changes because a certain character is being featured at that point in the movie. Another friend of the podcast, Daniel, commented about something that I've never thought about: Spider-Man. I am not a huge Danny Elfman fan. So it's like, okay, I'll go listen to the Spider-Man soundtrack. Great film score. Another great use of horns, by the way. It's a great film score, and then I was researching a little bit more of Danny Elfman, Men in Black, Hulk, 50 Shades of Grey, Edward Scissorhands, and a ton of other box office hits. I just am not very familiar with his music, so I had to go listen to some of it, so I knew at least I could talk with some, confidence about his music. I don't know what instruments he plays, but he features a lot of horns, and I love how horns, especially when they start off at a low volume, and just, to help the listener know, because I play some horned instruments and I play guitar and piano myself. Horn is one of the only instruments that once you start a note, you can increase the volume with your body. You can increase the volume organically. You can't really do that with other instruments. With other instruments, you need to increase the volume mechanically. Like if you're playing the guitar. You can hit a note with the volume low and then mechanically turn the volume up. And then that's how you can do that. The organ, same way. But the horn, especially the trumpet, you can start off low. And not just low in tone, I'm talking low in volume. And then as you increase your airflow, you're increasing the volume of that note. And the Spider-Man soundtrack, you get a lot of that, where there's volume changes and things, and it seems so small, but a good use of a horned instrument is an excellent way to take someone out of their life and put them in the fantasy world that they're watching, which is one of the reasons why horns are used so much in movie scores. We also had some friends of the podcast comment with some music facts, or some movie music facts. Nancy, friend of the podcast, she commented that Snow White was the first movie to have a soundtrack commercially available. And it's true. 1937, Snow White was the first movie to actually have a soundtrack available for purchase. I mean, we're going back quite a while, but it's just proof that the desire to own the music that people hear when they watch a movie, that desire started decades ago. 1937. It started before rock and roll started. All right. Another friend of the podcast, Cito, who's also, I may add, an amazing guitarist, mentioned something, and then I'm like, wow. It's a whole side of film scoring that I didn't even think of. He said, well, what about Phil Collins? He did some Disney movies like Tarzan and a couple others. And what Cito did without realizing it was he opened a door. There's movie composers who compose music for movies. And that's basically all they started off maybe doing classical music and this, that, and the other thing. But then they just decided, okay, my career is going to be movie composing. Perfect. But then there are rock and rollers, musicians, who then are asked to do certain movies. And they do 1 or 2 movies or more. And there's a whole world of them out there that I haven't even touched, like Fiona Apple, Bon Jovi, Phil Collins, Mark Knopfler, Nick Cave, Trent Reznor, and scores others. They started off in a band, or they started off rock and rolling or whatever, and then they got into making music for movies. And when a rocker begins to make music for a film, it comes out differently. It just does. Sometimes they stay to that style of writing a complete 4-minute package, and then, you know, the music director or whoever is working with the director of the movie, or the producers of the movie. Then they work on what portion they're going to use during what scene and whatever. Like, there's more to it than what I'm saying, but a lot of these rockers just write the songs. But some don't. Some get involved in actually like watching the scenes and then, okay, I'm going to increase the volume here and do whatever, because it is a different form of art. Now, it's definitely worthy of note that some people are coming out of the woodwork when it comes to film composing. Ludwig Göransson. I don't even know. I didn't hear of this guy until I watched The Mandalorian, which I listened to The Mandalorian and I thought, yes. Like, yes, this is absolutely perfect. Now, he's gone on to do other stuff. He did Tenet with Christopher Nolan. He did Black Panther, Creed, and some other movies. But I consider him like an up-and-coming, gigantic movie composer. This guy is going to be, he's already huge. And I think he's going to be one of those household names that just goes, you know, that you just mentioned when it comes to film composing. Something different that he does that I find really nice and refreshing is he makes YouTube videos. And you can watch the movie Tenet and think, wow, this music is interesting. And then go watch him on YouTube and he explains how he did every scene and why he did certain things for certain scenes. And what Christopher Nolan asked him to do and how he was able to accommodate and what he tried to do and what sounds he used and why during the car scene do you hear this type of thing in the music and this, that, and all this stuff. So it's really nice. Ludwig Göransson, he's already a big name, but I just think he's just going to keep getting bigger. Masterfully done with The Mandalorian. Probably my favorite work from him is The Mandalorian. Love it. It sounds like the Old West, and shouldn't it? Doesn't Mando look like a gunslinger from the Old West? It's just perfect. Perfect. Now, I can go on forever. You know, and maybe someday I'll do an episode of Ludwig Göransson, or I'll do a Hans Zimmer episode, or whatever the case may be. But I need to mention the one thing that really hit me. My favorite song ever in a movie. And it's not by Hans Zimmer. It was one day in 1989, I was sitting down in Tewksbury, where I used to live, and I was watching a comedy with Tom Hanks. It was not Money Pit. It was not Splash. It was a dark, adventure, action, mystery type of comedy with the Klopeks. Yes, I was watching The Burbs. Jerry Goldsmith wrote the score. It's a good movie. And you know, one day I was sitting there watching the movie with my parents. There's this scene where Ray Peterson, that's Tom Hanks' character, he blows up the Klopeks' house. The house just blew up. He was inside. But now someone notices something's moving in the entranceway to the house. It's Ray Peterson. He's alive. It's a miracle. And he comes fumbling his way out of the house, all bruised and battered. And then this music comes on. And it happened. Jerry Goldsmith became a very big part of my life. The man who did Medicine Man, Rambo, The Edge, Sum of All Fears, Congo, The Ghost in the Darkness, River Wild, and a whole slew of other movies. Gremlins, Total Recall, and he went down the horror road and did a bunch of horror movies too, because of that dark style that he would write in. This was the first song that I ever heard in my life, period, where I realized the vibrato on a trumpet can send shivers down your spine. So do me a favor, go to YouTube, look up the movie The Burbs soundtrack. It's a song called Square One, End Credits. And one day I was home alone. I was feeling lost and without direction in life. This was years ago. I was a lot younger. And that song came on. No words. And I think The Burbs was just on in the background, you know, and then the ending credits came on, and then that song came on, and it brought tears to my eyes. That song just tells me that adventure in life can exist, that enjoying a true adventure and not focusing on the hate that we see around us is actually attainable. And you know, movies are meant for us to do that anyways, right? Aren't movies meant to entertain or distract us? It takes us and puts us in the movie, in that place. And the music that is made for movies, these composers are trying to do the same thing. They want to take us out of our norm and put us in this fantasy. And they know that they have a big responsibility. So we need to be sharp and see that movie music is groovy music. So again, I might do a full and complete episode just on one film composer. But right now, I just wanted to come out and say, we need to be sharp and see movie music is just downright awesome. So until next time, this is your host, Artie Astor, saying be sharp and see that you listen again. Until next time, folks, keep it groovy.